Up to this point in this series of videos that I've been making, I've tried to lay out the pedagogical reasons for what we do in the classroom when it comes to literacy learning. I've talked about a number of things. I've talked about the philosophical underpinnings of why we're teaching a certain way today and how that fits into literacy, becoming more literate, and enhancing deep learning. I wanted to be a little bit more practical today. I wanted to lay out some brass tacks, if you will, some very specific things about how we function on a day-to-day basis and integrate literacy. You notice I said integrate literacy because there is nothing we do in the classroom that doesn't emphasize the idea of literacy. Remember that language has four modalities: reading, writing, speaking, and listening. And anything we do in any class to enhance a student's ability to read, to write, to speak, or to listen will be a step in the right direction to enhancing literacy. So, no matter how you plan a lesson, you have to think about and realize that you're doing something about literacy. So, in a classroom, when you're teaching a math class, when you're teaching junior students various math skills like geometry skills or algebra skills or arithmetic skills, you don't think that you're teaching literacy, but you are. You're using language and you're using specific vocabulary to teach each of those things. When you're teaching a math lesson on geometry, you're teaching things like rectangle and rhombus and parallelogram and triangle and square and cone and circle. And each of those words has to be used correctly. What's the difference between using the words in math correctly and taking a list of words that become a spelling list and using those words correctly and spelling them correctly? The difference is that when we used to have spelling in the class, we didn't think about the connection to literacy. I remember having a speller in grade 1 and grade 2 and grade 3 and grade 4 and grade 5 and grade 6 and grade 7 and grade 8. And there would be exercises on grammar, and there would be exercises on vocabulary, word usage, and there would be exercises on taking those words and using them in sentences. But we never talked about the fact that when we use words in sentences correctly, that helps us understand when we're reading something else. There was never any attempt to connect that spelling class to anything to do with literacy. You never even heard the word literacy when you were teaching spelling or grammar or the difference between a vowel and a noun and a pronoun. But they are, because if students don't understand those things, then how can they write properly? Or how can they understand what they read properly? The trick with literacy is that it underpins everything we say and do in the classroom. We used to tear apart language arts, and we used to have a lesson on reading orally and a lesson on problem solving in math and a lesson in comprehension and a lesson in vocabulary and a lesson in creative writing. but we never thought about it in terms of enhancing literacy skills. When my grade 5 students used to have to do their work on annual speeches, which were compulsory in the years that I taught junior classes, when I used to have them do the work on researching and then writing a speech out, writing out a speech, I never talked about the importance of speaking properly. It was always about writing proper sentences and looking at the audience and having the right voice. But when a student gets up and answers a question and doesn't use a correct sentence or incorrectly uses a particular word, we should take the time to correct that usage that's incorrect, because that's part of literacy. You need to make literacy a part of every single thing you do. When you craft a lesson, you have to focus. I remember telling my students, when you craft a lesson, when you're going to teach students, you have to decide what it is exactly you want them to be able to understand, be able to do, or be able to feel and respond to in that particular lesson. But that doesn't mean that on top of all of those things, you're talking about literacy. Because in order to comprehend something properly, you should be able to relate back to someone what you've read and what you got out of it. That increases deep learning. When you're teaching math skills to your students, if you have Johnny over there at the front of the class who's a whippersnapper when it comes to doing arithmetic, and you have Sarah in the back who isn't, when Johnny goes to the back to help Sarah understand how to solve a problem, he's using what he already knows and deepening his understanding, because he's trying to put words to what he sees himself inside his head. That's a literacy skill. When you have students that buddy up, sometimes there are schools where the older students buddy up with the younger students and they become reading buddies. When I practice reading to my class, I'm modeling literate behavior. When one of my students in grade 5 goes to the kindergarten class and starts to read to a buddy in that class, that's also modeling literacy. That's modeling how we should respond properly. I can't begin to tell you how often I found it difficult to explain to students that no matter what you're doing in the classroom, you are using one of the four modalities. If you're giving instructions on how to solve problems, you're using oral language and they are practicing listening skills. If you are asking them a series of questions about some historical event that they did research on, they're practicing their literacy skills in trying to relay that information to you. When a teacher has students practice their creative writing, that's when they should be stopping to help a student with punctuation. Did you put a capital where it belongs? Did you use a period? Are you using your commas properly? Not all the time. If you tore apart everything the students did all the time, they would lose faith in themselves. They would not want to learn from you. But you need to, as a teacher, keep track of when you've made an emphasis on writing properly, when you've made an emphasis on listening carefully and being able to relate back what it is that you were trying to get the students to understand, when you have some instructions to read, rather than you reading the instructions, you get the students to participate and make sure you ask every student over a period of time. You've got to be the record keeper. I asked Johnny yesterday to read. Today I'm going to ask Cindy. And the day after that, it'll be Roger or Christopher. You need to keep track, and you need to know all the time that what you do in the classroom, from the minute you greet them until the minute they leave at the end of the day, is enhancing literacy. And along the way, social and emotional skills. So when they come in the morning, you greet them properly, and you make sure they greet one another properly, and you make sure they talk to each other properly, and you make sure they write things out properly and attend to the importance of certain things. If we let our students write and use all the short forms and say and use the argument that, well, everybody writes that way, you're not helping them become more literate. Because when they pick up a book that's 10 years old and telling them about some event or looking at some event through the lens of a historian, that historian is going to be writing correctly, and your students have to know that that's how you write. There are times to write relaxed and times to write formally and appropriately. All of that is literacy. So from the time you see the students in the morning until the time they go home, you need to be aware of the fact that you are modeling literacy and you are attempting to pass on those behaviors to your students. No matter what, every time you are teaching with your students, you're involving them in reading, writing, speaking, and listening. And they need to be able to practice them all the time. Good luck.